JT Shaver here with new layer, and these might be the budget lights to get in 2021 and beyond. In this video, I'll show you everything you need to know about the Nanlite FS-150, 200, and 300, and how they compare to things like the Godox SL200, Aputure Amaran, and Nanlite Forza series of lights. First, we'll cover the basics, then we'll take a look at where Nanlite cut costs to see if we can find any deal breakers. The build quality on the FS series is surprisingly good. They're made mostly out of plastic or some other kind of composite material, but the finish is nice and they feel very sturdy. They have the carbon fiber look of the Forza series, but it's not actually carbon fiber material. There's dual locking knobs and rosette style teeth on the mounting yoke, and the part that mounts onto the light stand has a spring-loaded knob so it doesn't accidentally come undone. The honeycomb panel on the top and bottom for airflow, as well as the mounting yoke itself, are made of metal. I would put these lights somewhere in between the Godox SL200 series and the Aputure Amaran series, leaning closer to the Godox lights in terms of build quality. That's a positive thing because I think the Godox lights are really well made, and the Amaran lights aren't poorly made, but I do think the Nanlite FS series looks and feels more professional. One thing about these lights versus the Godox SL200 series specifically is that these have a square shape versus a cylindrical shape. It's not a huge deal, but because none of these lights have a carrying case, you'll probably be storing them on a shelf in a closet, and these lights are easily stacked where the Godox lights just tip and roll around, which can be a bit annoying. The back of the light has a screen, 2 knobs, and a USB port for future firmware upgrades. The controls are very simple, and apart from using this as a basic continuous light, it does have 11 built-in special effects. They do have some decent customization options for the effects as far as speed and intensity go, so they will be more useful than some other budget lights. The FS series also supports remote control with the Nanlink remote, as well as the mobile app, which, fingers crossed, will be released later this year. The FS-150 is actually 185 watts, while the 200 is 240 watts, and the 300 is 330 watts. This is important to note if you plan to run these on something like a portable power station, because they do use a little more juice than the names might imply. With that said, these lights are nice and bright, although from a practical standpoint, they're pretty much the same brightness as similarly powered lights. They're also very color accurate, with the exception of one measurement that I got only on my FS-200. I measured all 3 of these lights using my Sekonic C800 and got the following results. These lights are all advertised as being 5600 Kelvin, and all 3 were within 200 Kelvin, which is a good baseline for accuracy. For brightness, I got 7490 lux, 8860 lux, and 12,900 lux on the 150, 200, and 300 respectively. So there's just 1/3 of a stop difference between the 150 and 200, a 2/3 stop difference between the 200 and 300, and a 1 full stop difference between the 150 and 300. When I put the included reflectors on, I got 28,000 lux, 34,500 lux, and 41,800 lux, so you get about 2 full stops more brightness when the reflector is attached, of course at the cost of a tighter beam angle. The FS-150 is functionally the same brightness as the Godox SL150W II. The FS-200 is essentially identical to the Amaran 200 and Godox SL200 II, and the FS-300 is around the same brightness as other 300 to 350 watt lights. The crazy thing though is that the FS-300 is the least expensive option in its power range by a large margin. I also wanted to mention that the FS-150 is 1 1/3 stops brighter than 60 watt lights, because it's very similar in cost to many of those. I got a CRI of 96.6 or higher for all 3 lights and a TLCI of 99 across the board. I got an SSI versus the daylight standard of 75 for the FS-150 and 300, and 74 for the FS-200, all of which are really great scores. I got a color correction number of 0.5 green and 0.8 green for the FS-150 and 300, which means they do have a slight magenta tint. This is right in the range I like to see because LEDs typically turn a bit more green over time. The one thing about the FS-200 that I mentioned earlier is that it has a color correction number of 1.5 green. I'm not sure why this particular model has more significant tint, but personally I'd go for the FS-150 or FS-300 regardless, simply because the brightness of the 200 isn't worth the extra cost over the 150 in my opinion. If you want to see all the measurements I took, I'll have a link in the description to my light comparison tool. It uses real-world measurements instead of manufacturer-provided specs, that way you can compare lights fairly from any brand. So these lights have good build quality, brightness, and color accuracy, as well as built-in special effects. So where did Nanlite cut costs? As much as I love these lights, they aren't quite perfect. The main complaint that I've heard is in regards to the fan noise, which is valid in some cases. I recorded audio samples of all three FS series lights, as well as the Godox SL150W and 200 Mark II, and the Amaran 200D. I did boost the audio of all these clips the same, just so you can hear them a little better. The quietest fan by far is the Godox SL150W Mark II. Next is the Nanlite FS-150 and Amaran 200D. The Godox SL200W Mark II is close behind, and the FS-200 and 300 come in last and are about 5 decibels louder than the Godox SL200W Mark II. The fans on the Amaran lights are variable speed, while the fans on the FS series run at full speed 100% of the time. Since these lights are firmware upgradable, I'm hoping we see an update in the near future that allows them to run a little quieter at lower powers, but we'll see. The fans on all of these lights have slightly different frequencies, so they will be more noticeable depending on the sound system that you're listening to them on. So whether that's headphones or studio monitors or the speakers on your phone, it'll sound different on each one, and the measurements that I took were strictly loudness measured in decibels. Long story short, the fan noise on the FS-150 is on par with the alternatives, making it a good choice for talking head videos and interviews, while the fan noise on the other FS lights is on the louder end. If you're not super picky, or if you plan to record things that don't need silence like product shots, or if you just plan to do noise reduction regardless, then the FS-200 and 300 might be a perfect fit. I don't want to give Nanlite a free pass on this because I think it could have easily been avoided, and it seems like every new light that comes out is becoming quieter and quieter, so this is kind of a little step backwards. Another thing you'll notice about the FS series is that they don't have a traditional COB, but instead have an array of multiple smaller LEDs. It's pretty rare to find a light like this nowadays, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, it just depends on how you shoot. In some scenarios, lights with multiple smaller LEDs can sometimes give you a weird striped or checkered effect in the edges of your shadows. This only comes into play if you're using these bare bulb or with the stock reflector, and it's really not noticeable the majority of the time. Overall, it's a rare occurrence, but I wanted to mention it, and if you're using any kind of softbox or diffusion, then it's going to be a total non-issue. There are some more expensive Godox lights that have native V-mount battery support, although the SL Mark II series is not one of them. The Amaran lights don't have native V-mount support either and require an optional 2-bay battery station for that. Well, the Nanlite Forza series does have native V-mount support, the FS series does not, but that's an expected omission for lights like this at this price point. The last thing that makes these a budget light is the lack of carrying case. The Godox and Amaran lights don't come with a carrying case either, so I'm not going to take any points away from Nanlite for that this time. The one thing I can say is that the boxes these come in do have a handle and are easily repacked, so you at least have that option if you need to take these lights with you. And they only come with the light itself, the power cable, the protective cap, and the stock reflector, so there's not a ton of little parts to worry about. The best thing about the Godox SL Mark II series is the ultra quiet fan and even the fan off mode at limited power. The main selling point of the Amaran lights, in my opinion, is their Sidus Link mobile app control, especially if you have other Aputure fixtures. If not having those things isn't a deal breaker for you, I think the Nanlite FS series is a no-brainer for one of the best overall values out there, and maybe my go-to recommendation for budget lights moving forward. The Nanlite FS-150 is only $199. I know, right? The Godox SL150W Mark II is around $300, so there is a $100 price difference there. The Amaran 100D is $199 and the 200D is $299. Like I said, I don't think the FS200 is worth the $80 more over the 150 simply because the brightness is pretty similar. I do think the FS300 is an absolute steal at $349, especially compared to things like the Godox VL300 at $629 or even the 300-watt GVM light at $499. Overall, I highly recommend the FS-150, especially over slightly cheaper 60-watt lights. It's significantly brighter and better in every way for a marginal cost difference. If you're looking for something in the 300-watt range and don't need a bunch of extras, I can't think of a better value than the FS-300. And since they're a great match color-wise and one full-stop brightness apart, I think the FS-150 and 300 make a great 1-2 punch when paired together. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Is the FS-150 the go-to budget light now, or would you still rather pick something else? Can you think of anything that competes with the FS-300 at this price point? Links are in the description if you want to check these lights out yourself. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.